Professor Richard Wolff, you're always a welcome guest here on the Mother of All Talk Shows, and I'm glad that you could join us this evening. Tell us about this Bidenomics.
Well, mostly Bidenomics is pretty much the standard kind of mish-mash of half-baked ideas designed to keep the base of the political party, the Democratic Party, reasonably happy, sound good to as many other people as possible, carefully avoid honestly dealing with any problem at all, lest it be understood as recognizing that that problem exists. And that's what you have. You sent Mr. Blanken to China a few days ago. He tried to do something that was a little less aggressive than has been the norm. But while he was doing that, his boss, Mr. Biden, geared up to call Xi Jinping a dictator, because Americans really like to hear about how dictators are elsewhere, whereas we here live in the greatest democracy the world has ever seen, etc., etc., etc. Janet Yellen's trip, whatever it contains, will for sure carry on with suggestions that the Chinese should change their economic system, they should change their government, and they should be kinder to the Uyghur minority. This coming from a country that has much greater problems with minorities than China has ever had, treats them, and a larger number of them, much worse than what you see in China, not to defend the Chinese, but the hypocrisy, the behavior, it is for a growing number of Americans, above all, embarrassing. But let me answer your question directly. The biggest economic problems of the United States can be summarized in this way. We are a declining empire, following in our decline a similar trajectory to what happened to the British Empire a century earlier. We are a capitalism that has produced a level of inequality that is fundamentally unsustainable because it clashes so basically with the carefully cultivated self-image of the United States as not being torn apart by extremes of wealth and poverty. Mr. Biden, like his Republican counterparts, says not one word about either of these. For many of us watching who have been born and raised and lived in the United States all of our lives, like me, what is the most stunning thing about Bidenomics is its utter emptiness, its utter denial of the most fundamental problems. How are you going to deal with a population that thought the American empire would go on and be dominant forever more and more? Now that the BRICS have a bigger economic footprint in the world than does the G7, the United States and its allies. Now that the Chinese have demonstrated that they can do the technical wonders that the United States once pretended were uniquely its own creation, and on and on and on. There is a disconnect between not just the government and the mass of people, but the media, but the academic establishment. There is a gulf opening up in this country which probably will have more to do with what happens in the future than anything else. We are making colossal mistakes. Ukraine is only the most recent misunderstanding of what the relation of forces really is. Remember, our president told us that the ruble would become rubble in a matter of weeks. Didn't happen. That the Russian economy would disintegrate in a matter of weeks. Didn't happen. That the Ukrainians would be victorious. Didn't happen. I could keep going, but the point should be clear. We are not a society that is able anymore to make reasonable decisions because it is so busy denying the fundamental crisis it faces.
You say you could go on and on. I wish you would go on and on. I'd rather give the whole show now over to you. But let me take you back to Reaganomics. I'm so old, I remember when that was a thing. And a good friend of mine, Nico House, said the difference between Reaganomics and Bidenomics is that in Reaganomics, the wealth was supposed to trickle down. In Bidenomics, the wealth just effing disappears. Is that a fair characterization?
Well, yes, I would amend it slightly. Reaganomics was an argument about a trickle down that never happened. And Mr. Biden is a president who rails against Reaganomics, but does absolutely nothing to deal with the fact that not only did the wealth not trickle down, but it is crystal clear that in a magical denial of gravity, it trickled up. That we have had a growing inequality that has actually gotten worse, both at the time of Reagan and now. We have had a 40, 50 years of uninterrupted redistribution of wealth upward. And that is causing this country to blow apart. The support that I'm sure interests Europeans, the support for white supremacy, the support for an out-of-control, endless liar, grifter, a hustler like Trump, the creation of more and more like him, they all feed off of the bitter anger of masses of people whose jobs are insecure, whose incomes are now inadequate, who went through the redistribution of wealth, then the crash of our economy in 2020, then the pandemic, now the inflation, now the rising interest rates. It's almost a biblical situation of 7 plagues, only they're economic, they're matters of choice of a government so far disconnected that the majority of people left, right, and center hate the government, have no confidence, no belief in anybody who comes forward. We will have in the presidential election, and I sure hope Europeans pay attention, we will have one candidate who has now announced that he will run on the Green Party, a man named Cornel West that I'm sure many of you know of. He will be saying, and he will be the only one, talking about the real problems, the real crisis. We just had a Supreme Court in a country where white policemen shoot black people on a regular basis, not like in France every so often, and look what happened in France. No, we've routinized it. But our Supreme Court just took away a program called affirmative action on the premise that, and I quote you now, we no longer have a problem of racial inequality and racial discrimination. If you wanted an example of being deaf, dumb, and blind in our society, there we have it. And those are the people at the top.
Well, we will be interviewing Dr. West as soon as we can. And of course, I wish him every success. But there is another candidate, Professor, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., with far higher name recognition, voter recognition, who's also saying some truly radical things. That's new, isn't it?
Yes, yes and no. I mean, we did have Bernie Sanders. And for all the things you can say about Bernie Sanders, his race in 2016 and again his race in 2020 opened the space here in the United States for people left of center, or even if they're not themselves left of center, but they have some ideas that are left of center, they can now enter American politics. We have members of Congress who will answer the question, are you a socialist, with the word, yes, I am. We didn't have that for most of the previous half century. So we are moving forward. Kennedy is able to say some things. On the other hand, he has identified with other positions that make him look very strange to many of the American people who might otherwise be interested in what he has to say. But yes, we have some. And I think you're going to see more and more of them in the years ahead, because we have to rebuild what is missing in the United States. We have a far-right Republican Party and a Democratic Party which offers most of the same things, only not quite so quickly, not quite so harshly. But other than that, when we had neoliberal globalization, they were all for that. Now that we have more economic nationalism, they're all for that. They're all for whatever the community of big business and banks feels the need to do. The political parties, the two major ones, do their job of gathering various communities around other issues, abortion, being able to have 27 guns in the back of your automobile, or whatever it is that excites Americans. That's their job. Get those people so they vote for the two parties who can keep a troubled capitalism going for another few years. But the rest of the world sees it. Yeah. They see that the United States is not the political or economic force it once was, and the whole world is adjusting to that process.
You asked us Europeans to look at you. Let me ask you to look at us, although you may in part be looking in a mirror. Many people in Europe, many, trust me, look at this great society that the United States is, or at least was, this can-do place, this bustling, hustling, sending men to the moon, and its great economic and cultural weight in the world, and ask themselves, how did it come to be that the pick was between Donald Trump and Joe Biden? Is that the best that you can do? And I ask you to look at us because we are now experiencing the same thing. If you look at the German leadership, from Helmut Kohl down to little soldier Schulz, from de Gaulle down to Macron, from Churchill to Rashid Sunak, go figure, as Joe Biden even said. Why is the leadership of the capitalist world shrinking so?
Because it is a pure reflection of what is happening to the larger society. It is a sign that people who actually have a grasp on what's going on, who might have had the courage in the past to talk about real issues because there was a confidence that the United States could do, as you just described it, could solve the problem. There is a deep depression here in the United States. Mental. We don't know what it's like to be on the decline of an empire. Every empire is born usually out of the decline of the previous one. It evolves and develops over time. Then it peaks, and then it declines. The United States believed deeply, as I'm sure many in Britain did too, that the American empire, basically the 20th century, would keep going up. There's no preparation for, there's no ability to grasp that it's over, that we are now going down. This is too difficult. And so what we have are political theatrics. We have a Trump who manufactures a world completely out of his head. We have Biden, who is too old to do anything, but represents a vague idea of going backwards to that time when the United States could solve its problems and could face them. And so what this old man Biden does is pretend. It's all okay. We are still very strong. We are telling the Russians what to do. We are telling the Chinese what to do. We are telling the fact that we lost the war in Vietnam and we lost it in Iraq and we lost it in Afghanistan. Americans do not get the message here. They don't. Just like they're not getting the message here about Ukraine. These things are presented to Americans in the fantastic language of a dream about what was perhaps the case in the 1970s. It's long gone, and what you're watching in the United States is the desperate effort to hold on. That's why Mr. Trump's slogan is "Make America Great Again." And Mr. Biden has nothing better than that to offer. Vague promises that nobody really believes, but no one knows where to go. And as to the view here about the Europeans, let me be very honest with you. The great mystery that is being asked is, why are all the European countries falling in line more, it seems, falling in line more than before behind the United States, even though before it might have made a certain sense, whereas now it is choosing the wrong horse in the race, and there must be Europeans who understand that there's a tremendous risk for you in Europe in betting on the United States as it loses out to where, by the way, capitalism has gone. We are acutely aware in America. Capitalists left the United States and moved production to China. Capitalists made the decision not to invest in the United States and to make enormous investments in China. General Motors sells more automobiles to China in China than it does in the United States, and that's where their loyalty is. The biggest ally of Xi Jinping in Beijing, the biggest ally he and the Chinese have in the United States right now, are the leading megacorporations who do not want to lose their access to the labor force in China and to the growing market. Every business school graduate, and I've taught in business school, is told, you want to succeed in a business, go to where the costs are minimal and the market is growing the fastest. The United States is not where the costs are minimal, and the United States is not where the market is growing fastest. China is that place, and that is a powerful force holding Mr. Biden back from going much beyond irritation, rhetoric, and symbolic play acting as if we were once the mighty America, which we aren't anymore, and which the rest of the world learns about every day. That's why you have de-dollarization. That's why you have endless signs of the same reorganized world economy. And I'm fearful at this point that unspeakable mistakes will continue to be made by the United States that will pull Europe with it, premised on a reality that is long gone.
Professor Wolff, I could listen to you all night. I promise you that. Let's fix another appointment to listen to you soon. Professor Richard Wolff, really the oracle on economic affairs.